Dean Paisley is what you'd expect a 25-year veteran of the FBI to be. He's a very honest, straight shooter, and he knows Mark Whitacre very well. He was the FBI supervisor in the ADM Mark Whitacre price-fixing case, and he says this question mark should not be on this title. He says that he has no question that Mark Whitacre is a national hero. But in the early 1990s, Mark Whitacre was keeping a $9 million secret from Dean Paisley, and it was a secret he would regret.
My biggest regret would be that I didn't tell the FBI about the money issue during the time that I was working with the FBI.
But those in the FBI who were working with Mark Whitacre to build a case against ADM were shocked when their own informant was sent to prison for 9 years.
It was the first time in history that anybody had been a cooperative witness for the FBI and was prosecuted in the same case that they were assisting. It doesn't make sense.
Dean Paisley worked for the FBI for 25 years. He was the FBI supervisor during the Mark Whitacre ADM case. He is not a fan of the movie The Informant.
I know from experience going through that it wasn't a comedy. It was anything but a comedy.
Would you be willing to wear a wire? We need your help.
And the 25-year FBI veteran is also not laughing at the treatment that Mark Whitacre has received.
I always felt that he didn't get a fair shake, either from the FBI or the system. He didn't deserve all that happened to him.
Dean Paisley is now working to get a presidential pardon for Mark Whitacre, who he says is a national hero.
He helped every citizen in this world that ever bought any product from ADM. Had he not stolen that $9 million, he would have been a national hero at the highest levels, really.
Dean Paisley says he and the other main FBI officers who worked this case are now pressing for a full presidential pardon for Mark Whitacre. And at least one prosecutor who helped send Whitacre to prison is also helping in their effort.
There is coincidence and there is providence. About 2 years ago, I was invited by a friend to attend an event in Clayton. I arrived there shortly after lunchtime, and he grabbed me by the arm, and he said, "Come on, I want you to go with me to the lunchroom. I want you to meet a guy." He told me there would be people there from all over the country. And he said, "I want you to meet a guy I just had lunch with." And, oh, what a great guy. And he talked all the way over there what a great guy he was. And we got there, and he said, "Hey, Mark, I want you to meet a friend. This is Ben. Ben, this is Mark Whitacre." He shook hands. Mark said, "Ben, it's nice to meet you." I said, "Mark, I finished your book 3 days ago. This book, Against All Odds," which, by the way, became this movie, The Informant, starring Matt Damon. Coincidence or providence? This is an incredible story, and you're about to hear it. Please welcome Mark Whitacre.
Boy, what a wonderful opportunity to be here in St. Charles. And my wife Ginger is with me, and we're blessed and honored to be here. So thanks for being here this morning, and we're able to share our journey with you. And by the way, my first job out of college, when I finished my PhD at Cornell University in 1983, our first job out of college for both Ginger and I was where we moved not too far from here in St. Louis. And my first job was with Ralston Purina Company. This would have been in January of 1983. And actually, I talked to a couple individuals that I worked with here this morning at this event that I worked with at Ralston Purina. And one of them I haven't seen since like the mid-'80s, so I know he had to look at me because I had hair back then. I was 25 years old back then, and I know we had to look at each other a little bit to see each other, after all these years. So I'm 58 years old now, and I was 25 years old at that time. But boy, how wonderful it is to be back in this area, and with such a warm welcome to be here in St. Charles. Ginger and I have been here for about the last 48 hours, and we feel at home in St. Charles. Matter of fact, we were going to talk to a realtor this morning. No, but thanks again for the opportunity. We'd like to share our journey with you, Ginger and I would, this morning. And I'd like to start with this. Just imagine for a minute, that you wake up tomorrow morning and you have a tape recorder attached to your body with an athletic band around your back, that you have another tape recorder in a briefcase, and you have a third tape recorder in a notebook when you wake up tomorrow. And then you go to work like you normally would, and you'd be taping your coworkers, your supervisors, and in some cases your friends, that you'd be taping them, unbeknownst to them. Now imagine doing that every day for 3 years. I was a lot younger man during that time. This would have been 1992. I would have been in my early 30s. I worked for 4 FBI agents. I was an employee of an executive, one of the largest companies in the world. We'll get into that in a minute. And I would meet, out of the 4 FBI agents that I worked with, I had to meet with 2 every morning. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd meet with 2 of these 4 FBI agents. They'd shave my chest, hook microphones to my chest. They'd tape them to my chest after they shaved my chest. Check the batteries of 3 different recorders, and I'd go to work taping my coworkers, my supervisors, and my friends during the entire day, Monday through Friday, for 3 years. It was an interesting life. I don't recommend it to any of you. I'd like to talk about how I became an FBI informant in the first place, some huge mistakes that I made during the time I was an FBI informant, but I really want to emphasize later as we share our journey, emphasize what's happened the last 20 years since that point, since I've been an FBI informant. That's what I want to emphasize, but I want to kind of start from the beginning. The company I was working with that I was wearing a wire against is no average company. They're known as Archer Daniels Midland, commonly known as ADM, not too far from here in Decatur, Illinois. I want to mention a wonderful company, 30,000 people that go to work doing the right thing morally and ethically every day today, just like they did then when I joined them in 1989 at age 32. But there were 4 executives at the top that did not have the right moral compass, that was all about greed instead of purpose, that was selfish leadership instead of servant leadership, and I was one of those 4 executives. And all 4 of the top executives of Archer Daniels Midland, one of the largest companies in the world, went to federal prison. And I'm here to tell you today we deserved what we got. And we probably deserved even more punishment than what we got. I was in Frankfurt, Germany for about 4 years. I was doing joint ventures with ADM, and that's how I got to know ADM during that time. And I got to know the CEO, and I got to know the vice chairman when I was in Frankfurt, Germany, working for another large biotech company. And at that time in my life, in my early 30s, it was all about me. It was all about greed. It was all about how could I climb up faster on the corporate ladder. And so they made an offer that I couldn't refuse to become a president of their division, their biotech division. And I asked them, well, what would the salary of that be? And they told me, and I said, where do I sign? It was a $350,000 base salary, but with stock options and bonuses, it was well into the 7 figures because most of our income was in stock options and bonuses. And in 1989, at 32 years old, and to be making then 7 figures at that time, like I said, where do I sign? ADM at that time was the 56th largest company in America, number 56 on the Fortune 500. Today, I think they're number 34 on the Fortune 500, and they were the 90th largest company in the world during that time. And what they produce is the following: what you have for breakfast today, lunch today, and dinner tonight will likely have ingredients from ADM in it. It'd be difficult to go to the grocery store and buy a beverage or a food or a Kellogg's or Pillsbury or Tyson Foods or Coca-Cola or Pepsi or an orange juice. It'd be difficult to buy a food that doesn't have some ingredient, food ingredient from ADM in it. They were one of the largest food ingredient companies in the world. So here I am, 32 years old. I come over from Frankfurt, Germany, 1989. And I become the divisional president of the biotech division and corporate vice president of the company that placed me number 4 executive out of 30,000 employees. We had a CEO 75 years old. We had a president 69 years old. And I was number 4, half the age of the people above me. I remember the 2 first employees I met were the 2 pilots they assigned to me for the corporate jets. The 7 top executives each got their own corporate jet. So here I am when I moved from Frankfurt, Germany to Decatur, Illinois. I had my own Falcon 50. And boy, I had my Justin Bieber, my Charlie Sheen, my Britney Spears moment all in 1 month. I thought I was a rock star. I had hair back then too, by the way. And then we were looking at houses to buy to move my family, my wife Ginger, and our 3 children from Frankfurt, Germany. And the CEO said, well, he would like to move to a smaller home. He's 75 years old now. He's been CEO for 30 years. He wanted to move closer to the Decatur airport. He said, why don't you look at our home? And he told me about his home, and I said, boy, I don't think I can afford that. He said, well, I'll give you a huge startup bonus. It was a $500,000 startup bonus that I could have a down payment to buy his home, and that was my first week at work. A Falcon 50, a 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage that was the original house of John Daniels, the founder of Archer Daniels Midland. And what does a 32-year-old do when he has 8-car garage? He fills it with 8 cars. So I had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedeses, and like I said, I was having my Justin Bieber moment. So now you can ask the question, Mark, you're 32 years old. You live in a mansion with an 8-car garage. You have a Falcon 50. You're number 4 executive of the 56th largest company in America, with executives above you well over double your age, 75 and 69. So your opportunity to move up is tremendous with just the age that I was. Why in the heck, I'm sure you're asking, why would you blow the whistle on your own company? Well, the reason why I blew the whistle on ADM and became an informant for the FBI is because I didn't. It was my wife, Ginger. And Ginger, I've been with Ginger almost my whole life. I met Ginger when she was in 7th grade and I was in 8th grade. She was 13 and I was 14 when we first met. We were in the school band together. Grew up in a real small town called Morrow, Ohio, about an hour north of Cincinnati, near Kings Island Amusement Park, and that's where we grew up. About 800 people in our community. And there we are in high school. I was the senior class president. She was a year behind me. She was treasurer of her class. We were the homecoming king and queen. And we've been married 36 years as of June. And I know 36 years doesn't mean a lot to a lot of you. Some of you are married 40, 45, 50, and even more. But when you hear the rest of the story, for Ginger to stay through what I put her through and to be married for 36 years, by the end of when we're finished here today, you're going to say it's a miracle of God that she stayed with me through the journey that she went through. Because I put her and our 3 children through a living hell. She was tested. She was greatly tested with what I'm about ready to share. So she saw all these changes in me. She saw I was becoming obsessed with the title, divisional president and corporate vice president of the company and the corporate jet and the house and all the cars. She saw I was becoming almost addicted to that. So let's fast forward now. I'm 35 years old, 3 years with the company at ADM, and Ginger's 34. And we started having some very in-depth conversations to the conversation that was on November 5th, 1992, 3 years with ADM. She said, Mark, what's going on with your life? She said, you're an addict. And I said, Ginger, what do you mean I'm an addict? I don't use drugs. I don't use alcohol. All I do is work. I don't do anything besides work. She said, that's what I mean. You're an addict. You're obsessed to your work. You're a workaholic. And I said, Ginger, 90% of my income, my base hour is $350,000 a year. I've been reaching $3 million a year because of performance parameters and bonuses and stock options. 90% of my income is in bonuses. I have to work like this. She said, well, why do you have to? I said, Ginger, to make the living that I'm earning here for the family. Look at this house. Look at these cars. Look what our kids in the private schools. Look what I provide to this family. She said, Mark, I'd rather have a 2,000 square foot house. I'd rather have 2 Fords in the driveway and rather have my husband at home. She said, I feel like a widow. She said, you don't spend any time with our 3 children. I don't spend any time with her. She said, you go to church, but it's one ear and out the other. I don't really feel God in your heart. You may know of God, but I don't see God in your heart. I don't see any fruit in your life. I see it's all about you and all about greed. And I said, Ginger, if I'm going to survive in this company, I have to work like this. This is what I have to do. And she said, well, Mark, the thing that bothered her the most was when I come home and have dinner with the family, when I'm not traveling, I'm on the phone 3 or 4 hours each night after dinner until I go to bed. Every night, she said, the last 7 months that you've been with ADM, you're on the phone every night. And I said, Ginger, I have to be on the phone at night. 8 o'clock at night in Decatur, Illinois is 8 o'clock in the morning in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, in Japan, in Korea. They're 12 hours ahead of us in Southeast Asia. She said, well, why would you be talking to Southeast Asia 3 or 4 hours a night for the last 7 months? And I said, well, I'm talking to companies like Ajinomoto and Kiwahako, and I named the names, and she recognized the names. She said, well, those are your competitors. Why would you be talking to them? And I said, well, ADM assigned a mentor to me to show me how to do price fixing, to how actually even earn more income and more profits for our division. They have an international cartel. They've been doing it for 12 years. They told me that you can't be in the commodity business without having an international cartel, without having a price fixing scheme. And they're fixing the prices of the ingredients that go into all your foods. And that's just the way business is done in the commodity business. She said, boy, Mark, that don't sound good. That sounds like thieves. She said, how does this work? And I said, well, we get together with our competitors. We fix the prices of the food ingredients that go into Campbell's soup and Kellogg's cereal and Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and we earn an extra $1 billion a year by doing that. She said, Mark, you're a $70 billion company. Why would you steal $1 billion a year? I said, Ginger, everybody does it. In a commodity business, you won't survive with not. They've been doing it for 12 years. She said, Mark, you've only been there 3 years. She said, tell me again how long you're involved. And I said, for 7 months, since they assigned a mentor to work with me and show me how to do it. And it's the way business is done. She said, boy, Mark, I don't know if I can live with it. She had, who pays for this price fixing? I said, well, when someone goes to the grocery store like all of you, and you buy $50 worth of groceries, you'll pay $2, $3, $4 extra because of the price fixed ingredients in the foods that you would put in your grocery cart. She said, you mean my grandma on Social Security earning $300 a week is paying extra for her groceries, and we live in a 13,000 square foot mansion with an 8-car garage? She said, I don't know if I can live with this, Mark. She said, I'm going to go back up in her study and pray about it, and we talk about it later. I can tell you, I knew then I was in trouble when she said she was going to pray about it. She came back down an hour later after she prayed about it, and she said, Mark, God led me to a decision. She said, either you're going to turn yourself in to the FBI, or I'm going to do it for you. And I've known her since she was in the 7th grade, and I knew she meant it. I said, Ginger, I could go to jail. We could lose this house, these cars. The company would come after me with everything they have if I become a witness against them. She said, Mark, I'd rather be homeless than live in a house where illegal activity is occurring. She said, you're going to turn yourself in. I know you know that's the right thing to do. And you being involved only 7 months, I don't think you will go to prison. But if you do go to prison, I will stay with you. And I promise you that. So within a couple hours after Ginger and I had that discussion, a case that was going on for 12 years, the largest price-fixing case in U.S. history, I'm sitting for 4 hours with the FBI, with her by my side. No lawyer, just Ginger and I talking to the FBI about this case. I don't know how many of you have ever went to the FBI and told them you're stealing $1 billion a year. But I can tell you it's an interesting reaction. That phone was ringing off the hook. That phone reached the Attorney General. That phone reached William Sessions, who was the director of the FBI at that time. This became the largest international cartel price-fixing case in U.S. history during that time. Started by a stay-at-home mom who was raising 3 young children. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the difference between an informant and a whistleblower. A whistleblower is someone who sacrifices everything to do the right thing. That's my wife, Ginger Whitacre. Sacrificed everything to do the right thing. An informant, on the other hand, is someone who starts wearing a wire for the FBI to get less punishment, to get a lower sentence. That was me. And that's the difference between the informant and a whistleblower. I don't have the normal resume of a white-collar criminal. I went to Ohio State University for my bachelor's and master's, full scholarship at Cornell University, an Ivy League school to get my PhD in biochemistry. I showed this slide at the Lansing, Michigan prayer breakfast not long ago, a couple years ago. And I said, I don't have the normal resume of a white-collar criminal. About an audience about this size, someone stood in the back and said, that is a white-collar criminal if you went to Ohio State University. So I know I can't share this slide in Michigan. These meetings were all around the world. These price-fixing meetings. We get together with our competitors and we'd split up the market. Say, hey, you take Nestle's, we take Hershey's, you take Kellogg's, you take Pepsi, you take Coca-Cola. We split this market up surgically to the point where we're earning an extra $1 billion a year in income, each company, by price-fixing these food ingredients. And following around the world with us, these meetings were in Hong Kong, in Zurich, in Mexico City, 2 or 3 meetings a month. And following around the world with us was this green lamp. The FBI knew they were going up against one of the biggest companies in the world. This was a 7-week trial in Chicago. 7 weeks. It captivated Chicago when this trial was occurring in 1998. $70 million was spent on their legal defense. $70 million. The FBI knew they were going up against a monster of a company. So they wanted to have video of this illegal activity, not just the audio tapes that I was wearing. So the video camera was in this green lamp that looks like it came from a yard sale. That's the green lamp right there, and the video camera was in it. That green lamp was at the Shangri-La Hotel with 11 guys involved with this international cartel. 3 weeks later, Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. 3 weeks later, that green lamp was at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong, the same 11 guys sitting 5 feet from him. 2 weeks after that, that green lamp was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago. That green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month with the same 11 guys for 3 years, sitting 5 feet from him. That green lamp that doesn't match the 5-star decor of the $1,000 night hotels like they were. That green lamp was in a location like this. Thank God, the 11 guys, the 11 defendants and co-defendants, the price-fixing, the guys involved with the price-fixing case, thank God they were all men. Because I'm convinced if we would have had a woman among us, a woman would have said, you know what, it seems like that green lamp in every country we show up, every room we're at, that green lamp's following us around the world. But what it shared with me is, this is what it showed me with being an FBI informant. Greed blinds you. They could see dollar signs in their heads, but they didn't see what was sitting 3, 4, or 5 feet from them, that green lamp, at 2 or 3 meetings a month for 3 years. After 2 years wearing a wire, I was spent. Keep in mind, I wore one for 3. So I'm going to describe an incident that happened after 2 years wearing a wire. I've done 7 events for the FBI in the last 4 years, including their keynote speaker at the Quantico FBI Academy. And I've learned through them at the Quantico FBI Academy that it's the longest duration of anybody to wear a wire in U.S. history. No one's ever wore a wire every day for 3 years. And I don't think anyone's trying to break that record. But after 2 years wearing a wire, and there's a very accurate documentary on my website, markwhitacre.com. And on that website, there's a Discovery Channel documentary, and I'm going to describe a scene, because I had full immunity by wearing a wire. The U.S. attorney signed an immunity agreement for me risking my life and wearing a wire. They gave me full immunity, never to be charged. I'm going to describe an evening that all changed. The world changed the evening I'm about ready to describe. I'm wearing a wire for 2 years. The documentary shows this Discovery Channel documentary. They have actors reenact it. I'm out on a driveway at 3 in the morning with a gas leaf blower in Decatur, Illinois, blowing the leaves off the driveway during this horrific thunderstorm. Had my shirt and tie on, had the 2 microphones taped to my chest, blowing leaves off the driveway. 3 in the morning. Ginger heard the gas leaf blower from the bedroom window. She knew I was cracking under the pressure. She heard the gas leaf blower blowing. She comes out on the driveway. She says, Mark, come back to the house. Come back to the family. She said, most importantly, you need God in your life. I said, Ginger, why would I need God? They just announced 2 months ago, EDM did, when the 69-year-old president retires, I'm taking his place. I'm going from divisional president to company president. I'm going from number 4 executive to number 2 executive out of 30,000 executives, 30,000 employees. Number 2 executive. Why would I need God? She said, Mark, you need God more than ever. And let me tell you something, you're delusional. I said, Ginger, they announced I'm the next president. Succession planning is already being planned. She said, Mark, they only announce you're the next president because they don't know you're the informant. The CEO has 17 board members. They're all friends and family of that CEO. He's been there 30 years. When they learn that you were a wire against the top executives, against ADM, they're going to fire you. Surely you don't think you can just stay there and go to work like nothing happened. She said, you are delusional. She said, you're going to have to work somewhere else when this is all over with. And I thought you always knew that. She walked back in the house. I had 1 more year to go to wear a wire. And I started thinking, I was in denial. She's right. When this is all over with, when it goes public, and someday I'm sitting in a courtroom as a witness against them, the other executives, I'm going to get fired. And I'm going to lose that position. I had that position 7 years at that point. I couldn't imagine life without that. It was my whole identity. People would say, well, who are you? Here I'm Mark Whitacre, Divisional President of the Biotech Division, and give him my card. My whole life was that job. That was my whole identity. And I started thinking, I got obsessed with that compensation. How would I live without that compensation? How long would it take for me to get another job like that? Whistleblowers aren't very popular in corporate America. It would take time to get another job like that after wearing a wire for 3 years. So I thought it would take me about 3 years to get a similar job, about 3 years. And I thought, well, maybe they would give me a golden parachute, like most executives get when they get fired at that level, a golden parachute to give me the 3-year transition to get back on my feet. And then I started thinking, they're not going to give me a golden parachute. I'm a witness against them. They're not going to give me anything. So then I thought I'd write my own. I'd steal my own severance package. I'd steal my own golden parachute. I thought, well, they can't turn me in. They're stealing $1 billion a year for 12 years in a row. What could they do about it with the fraud that they're involved with? I'd be the most protected guy in America to do that. So I calculated 3 years of my income, bonuses, stock options, what that would take to keep me the same level of living, standard of living that we're used to until I find another job. Those 3 years added up to about $9 million. I went in the next day and started writing 5 checks that eventually, over a couple months period, became $9 million. I thought, thank God I went to Cornell. I'm the smartest guy in the room. I got my own severance package set aside. I can wear this wire like for another year like nothing happened. When I get fired, I'm protected. Thank God how smart I am, I thought. The day they learned that I was the informant, the very day they learned I was the mole wearing a wire for 3 years when this case went public, and they learned I was the one that collected the evidence for the FBI, that very day they called the FBI and they called the media and said, Mark Whitacre's no white knight informant. He stole $9 million from us the same time he worked for the FBI. They, in turn, once they knew I told on them anyway and exposed them, their feeling was, well, let's burn Mark Whitacre too. Let's put him in flames. So they went to prison for price fixing where I told on them, and I went to prison for fraud where they told on me. We all went to prison just for different things. Then I realized how smart I wasn't and how dumb I was. The amazing thing is, 2 of these FBI agents, being Christians, out of the 4, they show up at our home when they hear about the $9 million theft, the very time I'm working for them, and they said, Mark, you're going to lose your immunity agreement. You don't get immunity when you steal $9 million when you're working for us. You're not going to have your immunity agreement. But we're going to do everything we can to get you the best plea agreement we can get you, because we know you've been under a lot of pressure and made some poor decisions with this pressure. We took you undercover too long, Mark, and we realize that. So we're going to do everything we can to lighten your punishment, to minimize it. These FBI agents went to the prosecutor in Chicago and said, Mark Whitacre is the highest level executive ever to be a whistleblower in U.S. history. He stole $9 million at a time that he's blowing the driveway off at 3 in the morning and meeting with us at 6 in the morning every day for 3 years. At a time that his mental stability was at its worst, he did this crime. He helped solve a $1 billion crime, they told the prosecutor, a $1 billion crime a year for 12 years in a row, a $12 billion crime. In turn, he did a $9 million mistake. And we want to get the best plea agreement we can get for him, the FBI agents told the prosecutor. The prosecutor said, well, the news already know about the crime because ADM went public, so we have to punish him. So the prosecutors agreed they'd give a 3-year plea agreement, 3 years, but the prosecutor said we'll have a mitigating sentencing hearing in front of the judge where those FBI agents come and make the same argument to the judge that they just made to that U.S. attorney, to that lead prosecutor. In turn, Mark Whitacre will get a 6-month sentence, 6 months in federal prison after that mitigating sentencing hearing about the mistakes he made when he was under pressure. 6 months in a federal prison with no fence and a white-collar camp. My lawyer called me in Chicago. He's a judge now. Had Ginger by my side as always. Said, Mark, a deal of a lifetime. 6 months in federal prison after we have this hearing. That's what the prosecutors are going to agree to. 6 months. Deal of a lifetime, Mark, after a $9 million mistake. You lost your immunity, blew it, but 6 months is the best case scenario. I took that plea agreement, threw it in a trash can. I told my lawyer, I said, the FBI agents told me when they wired me up every day, they said, if you get caught wearing this wire, these guys are going to kill you. And I heard that every week for 3 years. I said, I risked my life. I'm not willing to go to prison for 6 months. He said, you got to sign it, Mark. You got to sign it or I can't represent you. I said, matter of fact, you just telling me to sign it. I fired him too on the spot. Fired him, threw the plea agreement in the trash can. Ginger begged me to sign that plea agreement and get this behind us. And I threw it in a trash can, hired another lawyer that did everything he could. He was out of the St. Louis area. Did everything he could to help me and was doing a good job, but I kept getting in his way. He said, don't talk to the media, and I'd show up on front cover of Fortune magazine. Don't talk to the media, and I'd show up on front page of Wall Street Journal. I was trying to fight this case in the media instead of the court system, to the point where I fought this case for 3 years in a very public media battle and got a 10.5-year sentence 3 years later. And I had a 6-month sentence I could have had. I ended up with a 10.5-year sentence by not signing that plea agreement. 10.5 years in federal prison. Ginger gets asked often, Ginger, when people go to federal prison in white-collar cases, the divorce rate, if you serve 5 years and longer, is 99%. 99% divorce rate if you serve 5 years and longer. Your husband had a decade sentence. They ask her, how'd you do it? How'd you stay with him? And Ginger said her faith would not allow a divorce. God said to keep her marriage and her family together. Divorce was not an option, she said. Her faith wouldn't allow it. But in every interview, she says murder was an option, and she sure considered that twice. And she said when I threw a 6-month plea agreement in a trash can, murder was on the table. So I went just like Martha Stewart, just like the Enron executives, the WorldCom executives, Bernie Ebbers at WorldCom, Jeffrey Skilling at Enron, Martha Stewart, Michael Milken. I went from a corporate jet to handcuffs and jail on public TV, national TV, and it wasn't for 6 months. It was for 8 years and 8 months. There's no parole in the federal system when you go to prison on a federal system. Parole no longer exists. That was taken out in the 80s. So you get 15% off for good behavior. So on a 10.5-year sentence, I had to do 8 years and 8 months, and that's the least I could do. 9 years in federal prison. 9 years. Well, that's where the movie ended, the movie The Informant. And that's Matt Damon with Ginger and I, my identical twin. I think you can see why they chose Matt Damon to play me. I'm the one on the right, by the way. You can't see which one I am. That's where the movie ended, and that's some of the books and Discovery Channel documentary and some of the things written on the case. The one that really has our faith journey and talks about what God's done in our life is Against All Odds. The one Ben mentioned. The others are more crime, drama, documentaries on the case. But what I want to talk about, the movie ended with me going to prison, and like life was over when you go to prison. I thought life was over when you go to prison. I thought life was ending. But what I want to talk about is what happened the last 2 decades. What's happened since I went to prison on March 4th, 1998? Well, first off, when I didn't get the 6-month sentence because I didn't sign it, and now I was looking at 8 years and 8 months, I pulled my car in the garage, and I tried to kill myself. I wasn't willing to go to prison for 6 months. You could imagine how I felt for 9 years. I tried to take my own life. I wrote a 17-page letter to Ginger, letters to all my 3 children, and tried to take my own life. I couldn't imagine going to prison for a decade. I was hospitalized for a month, treated for bipolar disorder, treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, some of the things that happen when you wear a wire for 3 years. The FBI have a guideline. They don't allow a white-collar informant to wear a wire longer than a year because they saw what happens when someone wears one for 3. The meltdown that I was going through. And I tried to take my own life. Stabilized, sent home after a month. But I still had at that point 9 years of prison I had to do after I was stabilized and sent home after that suicide attempt. This man in this picture you're seeing right now, his name's Ian Howes, CFO of a large pharmaceutical company. Stranger, I didn't know him. Said he was part of a group called CBMC at that time, Christian Businessmen Connection. Showed up at my house. He showed up at the doorstep. I just 1 month home from a suicide attempt. Just got home a few days earlier. He said, Mark, I was reading about you in the newspaper. I read about how you had a 6-month plea agreement. You threw it in a trash can to get 9 years in federal prison. And Mark, I want to tell you something. prison's going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in life with the journey you're ready to start. I ran back in the kitchen, and I told Ginger, I said, Ginger, there's somebody on the porch that's crazier than I am. She said, that can't be. And I said, Ginger, he said, this is the beginning of my life, and I'm going to find my true purpose in life with the journey that I'm ready to start. She fell to her knees, and she said, thank God that God sent someone in your path, because you sure haven't listened to me the last decade. And thank God. She said, I pray you go listen to this man. So I went out and asked him what he had in mind. He said, well, I'm going to tell you about Jesus. I've been going to church, I told him, my whole life. I go to church most Sundays. And he said, Mark, I'm not talking about going to church. I'm talking about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm not talking about knowing of God. I'm talking about knowing God and having God in your life. And that's what I'd like to share with you when we go through Operation Timothy in Scripture. He said, I normally spend an hour a week with somebody, but you're leaving in 7 months for a decade. So I'll spend 6, 7, 8 hours a week with you for the 7 months you have left. Kind of the accelerated Operation Timothy program. And he started going through Operation Timothy with me. 2 weeks after into prison, this man shows up. 2 weeks into prison, Yazoo, Mississippi. His name is Chuck Colson. I don't know how many of you know him. He was the White House counsel under President Nixon. Went to prison back in the 70s for Watergate, the Watergate scandal. Him and several other Nixon's associates in the White House. President Nixon, remember, was pardoned by President Ford, but Chuck Colson was not. Chuck Colson came and visited me in prison my second week, and he said, Mark, I didn't know who he was. Said he was reading about me in the Washington Post. He said he saw of his own life in my life what he was reading about. He went to Brown University. I went to Cornell, both Ivy League education. He got a doctorate in law, was a lawyer. I got a PhD in biochemistry. He said we both became top of our game. Him and White House counsel in politics, and me, one of the top executives, one of the largest companies in the world. And he said we both ended up in federal prison at $20 a month. And he said, thank God it happened. It was the best thing in the world that ever happened to him. And he started sharing with me the same things that Ian House was sharing with me. I can remember asking Chuck and Ian this question. I said, I think my sins are too big, too huge for God to forgive me. How could God forgive me after what I've done to my family? I had full immunity, and I blew it. I had a 6-month plea agreement. I threw it in the trash can. Now I've got 9 years in federal prison. Look what I've done to my wife and my 3 children. They showed me in Scripture what I'm telling you in a few minutes we spent hours on. That no matter how big your sin is, God will give you a clean slate. He will redeem you. He will pardon you no matter what you've done in your life. And we spent hours on that, going through the 4 Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And then I said, well, how would God forgive me? How can He do that? And he said, they showed me, Mark, God sent their only Son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross, a horrific death Jesus did for our sins. And I said, well, how can I have a relationship with God? I can't see Him. I'm a PhD biochemist. I have to see the evidence. I can't see Him. I can't feel Him. How do I get to know Him? He said, Mark, the way you have a relationship with God is Jesus. Jesus is the bridge to God. If you have a relationship with Jesus, that is a relationship with God. And we spent hours on that. Being a scientist, I thought no scientist believed in God. So at the same time that I was going through Operation Timothy, I started researching other scientists that believed in God. It was remarkable how many good scientists that I had a lot of respect for believe in God. That also had an influence on me. Even Albert Einstein said the Big Bang Theory was impossible. Only God could create man and the universe. Big Bang Theory impossible. Don Beerley, Nobel Prize quality candidate, biologist in University of Minnesota, spent 10 years trying to prove to his friends that God doesn't exist. Famous scientist. Only after 10 years to prove to him that God does exist. And he wrote the book Surprised by Faith, because he was trying to prove that God doesn't exist, and it proved to him that He does. So I was reading about these scientists that had a big impact on me with being a scientist. June 4th, 1998, my 3rd month in federal prison. I had 8.5 years yet to go. I got down on my knees on the first time and surrendered my life to Jesus Christ for the first time in my life. even though I went to church most of my life. I became a Christian and a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ at age 41, even though I knew of God my whole life. And I felt a peace and contentment that I'd never felt before. People would drive by our home in Decatur, Illinois, said, that man, 32 years old, has everything. A mansion, behind gates, a corporate jet, beautiful wife, 3 children, 8 cars, horse riding stables where your kids could ride inside with a heated arena. They said, that man has everything. And I can tell you, those 7 years, I had a void in my heart the size of Grand Canyon. I think I could have got the level of Bill Gates, and it would have never felt, money would have never filled that void. Now I'm in prison at $20 a month, and that void was filled at $20 a month with 8.5 years yet to go. Well, I looked at those, during my quiet time, I would pray. I said, God, Ian Howells and Chuck Colson said I'd find my true purpose in life. What's my purpose? I got 8.5 years in prison yet to go. So during my quiet time, I would keep praying about that. August of 98, 2 months after I turned my life over and surrendered my life to Jesus, I looked at those books on my desk on that 10 by 10 concrete floor in my prison cell. And I said, God, I get it. I get it. I took 61 people one-on-one, one at a time through Operation Timothy in federal prison. 61 people I took through Operation Timothy and Bible study and scripture reading with them and planting the same seeds with them that Chuck Colson and Ian Howells planted with me. 2 Corinthians 5:20 makes it clear, if you're a believer, you're an ambassador for Jesus. You're an ambassador for Christ. And 2 Corinthians 5:20, well, I met 2 ambassadors for Christ face to face with Chuck Colson and Ian Howells. Chuck Colson mentored me for 9 years in federal prison. He mentored me my first 6 years that I got out a decade ago, out of federal prison, until he passed 3 years ago at age 80 on April 21st, 2012. Tremendous impact on my life. I dearly miss him, but I know where he's at. He's in heaven with eternal life in heaven, and there's no doubt in my mind about that. So I found my purpose. It wasn't to be CEO of one of the largest companies in the world. It was to become a servant leader, not a selfish leader, and it was to help other people. Through Bible study and Operation Timothy, I helped hundreds of guys get their GEDs, learn how to read, and learn how to write. The 9 years in federal prison became the 9 most productive years in my life. At age 58, say, Mark, what are your most productive years in your life? 9 years in federal prison at $20 a month. Because the first time in my life, I was helping somebody else besides myself. In prison, as a family, we got better and not bitter. The only difference between those two words is the letter better and bitter is the letter E in better. The letter E for eternal value. None of you are going to be involved in a price-fixing case. None of you are going to wear a wire for 3 years. None of you are going to go to federal prison for 9 years. But all of you, and some of you have seen it already, all of you are going to have adversities in your life. And what I'm here to tell you, unequivocally, with God in your life, when you're hit with adversity, you will get better and not bitter. And my wife, Ginger, and I, and our 3 children are living proof of it. With God in your life, you will get better and not bitter when you're hit with adversity. Ginger, for example, in federal prison with good behavior, you get to go to a better place. I started off in Yazoo, Mississippi, not a good place. Good behavior got me to Edgefield, South Carolina, a lot better place. Better behavior and good behavior got me to Pensacola, Florida. On the Forbes prison list, they rank on Forbes prisons just like they do universities. And Pensacola, Florida Navy base is the #1 ranked prison. So I went to Cornell for my PhD, and I went to Pensacola prison base for my prison time for my last 5 years. Ginger moved to Yazoo, Mississippi, lived next to that prison. When I got sent with good behavior to Edgefield, South Carolina, Ginger picked up with our 3 children. She moved next to Edgefield, South Carolina prison. When I got moved to Pensacola Navy base for my last 5 years of prison, Ginger moved. She moved to 3 different states with my 3 children. They allow your family to come in a visiting room for 20 hours a weekend with a guard in a corner in a visiting room setting. Ginger came 20 hours a weekend with my children for 9 years. They added her days up in the book Against All Odds from prison records, and it added up, Ginger, 8 hours a day in federal prison, added up to 3 years and 8 months that she spent 8 hours a day in federal prison. Her days added up to 3 years and 8 months. She went to prison with me, her and my children. God blessed me with an amazing wife. And there were 5 wives out of 700 inmates at that prison. 5 wives coming because the divorce rate's 99%. It's a miracle of God that she stayed with me. A miracle of God. God redeemed me. God pardoned me on June 4th, 1998. And He gave me a second chance and He gave me a clean slate. God did. On June 4th, 1998. 17, 18 years ago. And then He touched the hearts of society. After He forgave me, He touched the hearts of society to forgive me. Like Ginger. And to stay with me and my children. I watched my son in December, 29 years old now. He was 6 years old when I went undercover. He was 12 years old when I went to federal prison, our youngest son. He's 29 now, and he was 21 when I got out of prison 9 years ago. And I watched our son give his testimony in December in Cincinnati. And he said, thank God my dad went to federal prison because I got to know my dad for 20 hours a weekend for 9 years. My kids have all not just survived, they thrived this experience. And we hear all 3 of them say the only marriage they could ever imagine having is a marriage like their mom and dad. And that credit, ladies and gentlemen, goes to my wife, Ginger, because I tested. Because I tested that marriage. That's Ginger and I and our 3 children today. And the reason why there's 4 on there, our youngest one is married. So the one that looks the most like us is our daughter-in-law, the one behind Ginger, the one that looks the most like us. And ladies and gentlemen, when we got hit with adversity because of God in her life, this is a family that thrived, not just survived, because of God in her life. Got better and not bitter. The food companies we stole from, Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Kraft and Campbell Soup, the companies you'd buy some of your groceries from, those companies won a huge settlement in August of 98, 6 months after I went to prison. We were literally, Ginger was almost ready to move back at home with our 3 children, back with her mom, because we were running out of money. If I would have taken the 6-month plea agreement, I would have left Ginger in fine shape. But with fighting that case for 3 years and the legal fees I had and the number of lawyers I had, we lost everything we had, $9 million in fines, $2 million in interest, large amounts of legal fees, till we ran out of money. She was about ready to move home. She got a call in August 98. A lawyer named Ken Adams out of Washington, D.C. He said he represented the food companies that were the victims of the price fixing. And Ken Adams told Ginger, he said, Ginger Whitacre, if it wasn't for you, price fixing would still be going on like it was for 12 years. And it would have never stopped. And if it wasn't for your husband wearing a wire, it would have never been exposed. And for that, we want to take care of your family financially for a decade while your husband's in jail. The people I stole from took care of my family for 9 years. They won hundreds of millions of dollars back in class action suits. Coca-Cola alone won $400 million back in reimbursed for the price fixing. And those companies took care of Ginger and my kids for 9 years financially. If that's not a miracle of God, I don't know what is. That's God touching hearts for those attorneys, those general counsels, to be thinking of my family when they won those class action suits. That put Ginger back in college at age 40 to be a teacher. She was teacher of her year of a whole city in 2007. Put her daughter through college. Put her youngest son. Our daughter went to Duke. Our youngest son, an MBA from Georgia Southern. The people I stole from put my kids in college, put Ginger back in college, and paid our house payment and car payments for 9 years. That's a miracle of God. The FBI agents and prosecutors, I know that clip went off, and we use that often. I don't know what happened there. But the FBI agents and prosecutors, you go to my website, and you can see that clip. They became my biggest supporters. Biggest supporters. All 4 of the agents and my prosecutor. I've done 7 events for them. They're even trying to get me a full presidential pardon today, and that's what they talk about in that news clip that wasn't able to be finished. Another reason why I tried to take my own life, I thought I would not be able to get another job. So that's a reason why I thought I wouldn't have a family when I got out. I thought I wouldn't be able to get another job after 9 years of jail. Cornell University, where I graduated in 1983, started lobbying for jobs for me 2 years before I got out. And they started visiting me in prison. They had 4 job offers the day I got out of prison in pharmaceutical and biotech companies, 4 different companies, the day I got out of prison after 9 years in jail. They had executives visiting me in prison. That's a miracle of God. Now, by the way, when you get out of federal prison and you're involved with a $9 million theft, you don't start off the director of finance. You don't start off the head of finance. But being a biochemist, I started off in a cancer research company doing their clinical trials, not involved with any money around me. I've been there 9 years. I've had 4 promotions, and I'm now the COO and the Chief Science Officer, the number 2 executive of that company, overall finance. That's a miracle of God. It's a miracle of God. I'd like to urge you this. If you don't know God, I urge you to explore Him and get to know Him. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ and know God, I ask you to reach out to Him. It's the most important decision I've ever made in my life. Being a scientist, I like to look at evidence. Clinical trials for cancer research, we look at the evidence. Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. I've seen the evidence that God exists. I don't live just on faith alone. I've seen the evidence, and the evidence is what I described. 99% divorce rate, and we're still married. 36 years this year. The companies I stole from take care of my family financially. Get employed the day after I get out of prison. Ladies and gentlemen, I've seen the evidence. When you turn your life over to Jesus Christ, I've seen the evidence that He exists. And it's the most important decision I've ever made in my life. And I can't tell you and urge enough how important it is for you to explore Him. Chuck Colson did 38 events at age 80 to share what God's done in his life. 38 events at age 80. I did 94 events like this last year, and I'm doing 97 events this year, like what I'm doing here today. And I will continue to do these events and continue to get on a plane and continue to share this story till I can't do it anymore. Because there's nothing more important than what God has done in my life. And I'm going to be a witness for Him until I can't do it anymore. I'd like to end this morning with prayer. I'd like to end with the prayer that I prayed on June 4th, 1998, when I brought Jesus in my life for the first time. And I'd like to ask you in silence, if you don't have Jesus in your life or God in your life, to pray along with me in silence, and invite Him to be part of your life. And if you already have Jesus in your life, pray along with me and re-energize and renew your relationship with Him in silence when you pray along with me. But I'd like to end with prayer. Let's pray. Father, I am a sinner. And Father, I know the only way to you is through your Son, Jesus Christ. And I know, Father, you sent your Son, Jesus, to die a horrific death on the cross for my sins. But I do know that there's no good works that can get me to heaven. There's no good works that will give me eternal life, only because of your grace and your mercy that you will accept me and you will redeem me and you will pardon me. If I surrender my life to you, knowing that your Son Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and knowing that 3 days later He ascended, He was resurrected, and then eventually ascended back to heaven, sitting next to you on the throne. Father, I ask for the men and women in this room, if they don't know you, to indwell their hearts with the Holy Spirit, where they get to know you, where you would turn their lives also to ashes, from ashes to beauty, and that you will give them a purpose and fill that void like the void that I had that was the size of Grand Canyon. Only you can fill that void, Father, and I know that. I ask you protect the men and women in this room and their families. I ask that you guide them each and every day. And I ask that for all of us in this room, Father, that you guide us to be the men and women you designed us to be, where it's all about you and not about us. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.